paper by Anthony Westgate.
Kabbalah and the Protestant Revolution. Introduction. It is a fundamental mistake to think of the Protestant Reformation as a mere rebellion against the corruption of the Roman papacy. The Reformation is an ongoing Kabbalistic revolution that has fragmented Christendom into thousands of pieces, imposing the worst catastrophe upon Western civilization. It led to the destruction of Christian tradition, the birth of Freemasonry, the spread of nominalism, and the creation of the Antichrist Zionist state. However, it is also a mistake to think of Kabbalah as mere mystical Jewish teachings. Kabbalah is a collection of revolutionary, esoteric, political doctrines to repair the world and establish both a spiritual and material Jewish utopia. An admission of this can be found in the words of Dr. Michael Lightman, host of the largest Kabbalah website in the world, where he states, "The wisdom of Kabbalah, as defined by the greatest Kabbalists, is a method to correct man and the world. If Kabbalah will spread amongst people, then we will avoid all the catastrophes. We will merit both this world and the world to come. And both of these worlds will unite into one. Only the dissemination of Kabbalah will save the world." Achieving world repair, known as Tikkun Olam, is the primary aim of Kabbalah. It is a universal revolutionary blueprint to overthrow the Christian order by rearranging the material world through the magic of social engineering, technology, and institutional control. This alchemical transmutation of mankind into a new primal man, known in Kabbalah as Adam Kadmon, is the manifestation of the Antichrist, created through the merging of opposing forces and systematic revolution. As the world's preeminent scholar of Kabbalah, Gershom Scholem, notes, "From the dust of this cosmic catastrophe, the universe is reconstructed through the primordial Adam Kadmon, who is the creator of the earthly Adam. From Ein Sof, healing, constructive lights go forth from the forehead of Adam Kadmon. After the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, the Jews were scattered from Palestine and found their new textual architecture in the form of the written word. According to the Sefer Yitzrah, the book of creation in Kabbalah, the numbers and spheres of the 10 Sephirot constitute a kind of cosmic DNA code. 3. This represents the framework of the Kabbalistic understanding of reality, with the Sephirot as a skeleton of the universe that shapes the creation of this new man in the construction of the Jewish messianic kingdom of the Antichrist. Jewish influence is inseparable from revolutionary movements and heresies in the Christian world, and the religious anarchy of Protestantism provided a fertile soil for it to take root. The Protestant movement is the longest-lasting revolution in world history, advancing history itself towards the end of the age. In this article, I will uncover some prominent themes, figures, historical events, and doctrines in which the inner esoteric spirit of the Protestant Revolution has transmitted and contributed to the mystical reshaping of Western civilization and humanity. The revolution will be Judaist. Like all ancient Christian heresies, Judaizing never dissolved, but continued its transmission in new forms throughout history. The early Church Fathers strongly condemned the Judaizers of their time, notably seen in St. Ignatius of Antioch's letter to the Magnesians, where he declared, "It is absurd to profess Christ Jesus and to Judaize. For Christianity did not embrace Judaism, but Judaism Christianity, that so every tongue which believeth might be gathered together to God." For nearly a century before Luther's Reformation, The Jewish-financed Hussite revolution, led by Jan Hus, gained cooperation with the Jews in Bohemia due to their shared affinity with Judaism and undermining the authority of the Catholic Church. 5. In fact, the Hussites were among the first sectarian movements to practice sola scriptura and strongly oppose the veneration of saints. Hus was eventually burned at the stake by secular authorities after the Council of Constance declared him a heretic. But his teachings would later influence Luther, who even wrote prefaces to a number of Hus's works. To this, Newman concludes that the Hussite Reformation, from its inception to its decline, bore marks of Jewish and particularly Old Testament influence. 6. By 1517, the Jews who controlled the spice trade began reinvesting their profits into the printing industry, quickly weaponizing print technology as a profitable means of subverting the Reformation. 7. Their secret trafficking of unauthorized and heretical biblical translations helped them gain advantage in the war with Spain while promoting the Reformation and weakening the hegemony of the Roman Catholic Church. It is no coincidence that the Reformation emerged while the Medici banking family, who funded the Renaissance, simultaneously introduced Hermetic and Jewish esoteric literature into classical learning. 8. The Renaissance thus birthed a new syncretic religion of Christian Kabbalah, which began to flourish in the late 5th–10th century. Championed by Catholic humanist Johann Reuchlin and Italian proto-Protestant Giovanni Pico della Mirandola. Both Reuchlin and Pico were so deeply entrenched in Kabbalah that any degree of influence they transmitted should be understood as Kabbalistic, whether direct or indirect. E. Michael Jones writes on the very danger in this transmission. Christianity enabled Reuchlin to derive from Kabbalah a universal esoteric science which incorporated pagan, Jewish, and Christian elements. But once that esoteric science was derived, it threatened to replace Christianity as the true religion. 9. Christian Kabbalists were drawn to the Jewish esoteric notion that Hebrew is a divine language possessing inherent mystical power, the tongue through which God created existence, communicated with Moses, and engaged with celestial beings. But they also saw it as a means of legitimizing Christianity, tying it to an esoteric Renaissance tradition called Prisca Theologia, which is the belief that the most ancient theology is the truest. 10. Renaissance historian Francis Yates maintains that Christian Kabbalah should be understood as a euphemism for Judaizing Protestantism, adding, Christian Kabbalah was not a recapitulation of the Jewish tradition, but its creative remolding, a metamorphosis engendered by newly aroused religion-making vision. Though it would be too bold to judge Gnosticism a legitimate historical parent. This movement was arguably encouraged and fostered by distant transmissions and legacies of the old heresy. 11. Considering Yates specialized in esoteric studies, the language she used here was almost certainly intentional. This creative remolding is a Kabbalistic manipulation of Christianity through ritual magic to reshape the material world, which manifests in the internal nature and external transmission of Protestant thought in the following 2 ways. First, in the internal emphasis on salvation as an alchemical process of self-enlightenment through the transmutation of a new man. Second, as external actions to hasten eschatological events by replacing the old Christian order with a new messianic Jewish kingdom on earth. While the Christian Kabbalists sought to legitimize Christian doctrine looking back through Prisca Theologia, Christian Hebraists, such as the Hussites, looked forward by studying Jewish texts and rabbinical traditions as part of an eschatological mission to convert Jews to Christianity. Yet, even in the Hebraists' application of seemingly non-mystical rabbinical texts contains an esoteric Jewish understanding of reality, which likely played no small role in Philip Walsh's claim that the Reformation drew its lifeblood from rational Hebraism. 12. One Hebraist who all three primary reformers shared a common influence from was a well-known converso and Franciscan monk named Nicholas of Lyra. Zwingli especially had several Hebraist colleagues, including his teacher Jacob Siporians, a former student of Reuchlin. According to Newman, from Pico, it is certain that Zwingli borrowed considerably 13 to describe numerous mysteries in the Old Testament, such as his Kabbalistic application of the ineffable name. It's safe to say Yates is correct in stating that this remolding of Christianity is nothing more than a new manifestation of the ancient Judaizing heresy, but with the power of a new technology. Gutenberg's information machine would accelerate the spread of this ancient heresy at an unprecedented rate, sparking the Reformation as the first viral movement in history. Luther's esoteric revolt and the alchemy of sola scriptura. While Luther rightly opposed the Kabbalistic foolishness of his contemporaries and later wrote the infamous polemic on the Jews and their lies in his commentary on Galatians, he referred to his newly conceived doctrine of justification by faith alone, sola fide, as true Kabbalah. 14. Luther was not referring to the teachings of Kabbalah here, but the acknowledgment tells of the hermeneutical trend of Hebraism established by Reuchlin to unlock the mysteries of the Scriptures. Nevertheless, in light of Luther's sola fide doctrine, it is interesting to see how over time it developed into a kind of Kabbalistic ritual magic among modern evangelicals to make a mere profession of faith and be saved, as if the words themselves contain an inherent mystical power to regenerate the individual by simply speaking them. Another notable esoteric influence in the development of Luther's theology can be seen in his writings, where he referred to Prisca Theologiae and mentioned alchemy as symbolic of the Christian resurrection of the dead. The science of alchemy the first like very well, and indeed 'tis the philosophy of the ancients. I like it not only for the profits it brings in melting metals, in decocting, preparing, extracting and distilling herbs, roots. I like it also for the sake of the allegory and secret signification, which is exceedingly fine, touching the resurrection of the dead at the last day. 15. The doctrine of sola scriptura implies the Kabbalistic notion that the Scriptures are alchemically encoded with mystical wisdom, which can only be decoded by the individual interpreter acting as the key. To unlock their true meaning point, 1-6 Moshe Idel is among many Jewish philosophers to point to this notion in describing Kabbalah as the keys sacrosanct, even in the eyes of the Jew, that could unlock the gates of the mysteries of the Scriptures, demonstrating Christian truths using Jewish rules. 17. Likely due to mere coincidence, it is at least interesting that a similar metaphor was used by Fr. Seraphim Rose to describe Luther's new normative authority of biblical interpretation, observing that it opened the gate to total subjectivism in religion. And thereupon he gives us a key also to today, because this same principle, the individual, whatever I believe, whatever I think has a right to be heard, then becomes the standard. He himself finally achieved some kind of dogmatic system and tried to force it on his followers. But the very idea which he fought for was that each individual can interpret for himself, and therefore from him come sects. 18. The spawning of new sectarian movements was also a result of Luther turning the Protestant churches into Talmudic debate halls. As Jones writes, with evangelical theologians acting as rabbis arguing over biblical interpretations. He adds that Luther, although outspoken against the other Judaizing reformers, consulted rabbis to construct his text, and that text was, therefore, skewed in favor of Judaizing. 19. By 1534, Lutheranism had won over Reuchlin's birthplace of Württemberg while it was flourishing with Hermeticism, culminating in the Rosicrucian order. The symbolism of the rose and cross is likely due to the influence of Lutheranism on Rosicrucianism. Most Reuchlinots later became Lutherans, and the flame that Reuchlin kindled, Luther fanned into a raging inferno in which the Talmud and the Reformation were merged into each other. 20 David Walsh writes that during this era, the influence of the Enlightenment, to the extent it had made itself felt in Württemberg, was integrated with a theosophic philosophy of nature and a speculative pietism which was concerned with the progressive revelation of the divine structure of history. 21. In the 18th and 19th centuries, Württemberg continued to be a central hub for the esoteric tradition. Described by Justinus Kerner as the homeland of haunted and spectral doings and a very goblin's nest, due to its narrow valleys and old castles, 22 Hermeticism profoundly influenced G.W.F. Hegel, another Württemberg native who developed connections with the Freemasons and Rosicrucians. Philosopher Glenn Magee notes that some of the more famous claims of Hegel's historical dialectic are to be found in the Kabbalist and Joachimite mystical traditions. 23. Following Luther's revolution, the esoteric tradition in Württemberg maintained a long and rich history spanning several centuries, still present today. Such is the case for the various societal transformations that occurred wherever revolutionary Protestant activity flourished. The death of the old order and rise of the new gods. Every anti-Christian revolution throughout modern history included some form of iconoclastic destruction in its wake. The Jacobin, the Judeo-Bolsheviks, the Spanish anarchists, all carried out the physical destruction of the old Christian order to construct their new chiliastic vision. The Protestant Revolution was certainly no exception. Yet, because of the inherently sectarian nature of Protestantism, iconoclasm was opposed by Lutherans while violently carried out by the Zwinglians and Calvinists throughout parts of Europe. Out of the main three Protestant reformers, the Swiss theologian Ulrich Zwingli was the most educated in Hebraic studies. As it turns out, Zwingli's sect was also the most aggressively iconoclastic. Newman confirms the Judaic influence of Zwingli's iconoclasm in the reformers' own words. The Jews do not carry images, neither do the Zwinglians nor Calvinists. 24. It is no mystery that Zwingli's iconoclastic zeal derives from his obsession with rabbinical thought, for which Luther and many Swiss Catholics rightly labeled him a Judaizing heretic. It's quite common even among Protestant historians to describe the iconoclastic revolt with the recurring language of the old order being destroyed. Here Philip Schaff includes how Swinney was true to his principles of Reformation, and not even the cross of Christ was exempt from the iconoclastic fury. The old order of worship had to be abolished before the new order could be introduced. The destruction was radical but orderly. The churches of the city were purged of pictures, relics, crucifixes, altars, candles, and all ornaments, the frescoes effaced, and the walls whitewashed, so that nothing remained but the bare building to be filled by a worshipping congregation. 25. On paper, Calvin took a less rigorous approach to the abolition of holy images. While he strongly opposed the inclusion of holy images in Protestant worship, even calling the depiction of the cross an abomination. 26. He did not explicitly advocate for iconoclasm, and instead encouraged a more peaceful removal of Christian images. However, the Calvinists justified their violent iconoclastic crusades of 1566 with Calvin's doctrines, and were never explicitly condemned by the Reformer. It is commendable that Luther, in this regard, opposed such extreme iconoclasm. Why, then, was the destruction of Christian images not held as a consensus position among all three Reformers, despite their mutual appeal to a clear reading of Scripture? Perhaps for Swinney and Calvin, the clarity of Scriptures came not from a clear reading of Exodus 20-4, which does not detail what constitutes a graven image, but from the Babylonian Talmud, which does clarify, it is forbidden to make complete, solid, or raised images of people or angels, or any images of heavenly bodies except for purposes of study. 27. The iconoclastic fury of the Calvinists represents not only a material abolishment of the old Christian order, but the establishment of a new order where the individual is the new God. In the words of Fr. Seraphim Rose, this is the meaning of humanism and Protestantism. Get rid of the religious tradition, the Orthodox tradition, so that the new God can be born. Just as the individual God is being born, also the world now becomes divine. 28. The new American religion of Puritan Kabbalah. From the moment the Pilgrims arrived in New England, Kabbalah began to make its way through academic institutions and Puritan congregations, laying the foundation of a new mystical American ethos. Despite the colonial Jewish population being minuscule, Kabbalah had such a profound impact on the early founders that Ogren claims it to be the fabric of American Protestantism. 29. End of Part 1. Part 2 coming soon.